All right, folks. So welcome again to the Josh Scanlon podcast. I have just such a treat here. I got Craig Israelsen, who I've been reading for going on almost, 15 years, since 2004, I think, is when I first came across him. And Craig has been writing something called the 7TwelvePortfolio, and we'll get into that here in detail. But in terms of just wonderful research, wonderful topics on investing, keep it simple, stupid, diversification, watch your fees and all that. It's just fantastic stuff. And it's just a privilege, Craig, to have you on board here today. So welcome on board, sir. And if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself, Craig, and we'll just go from there if that's okay.
Super. Thanks, Josh. Well, I'm a California kid. I grew up in the Bay Area, California. Before it was Silicon Valley. And spent a lot of fun time chasing quail in orchards in Los Altos, California.
Los Altos. That's my granddad lived for many, many years. Oh man,
really?
Cool. Yes,
yeah,
sir.
It was a great place to grow up.
Absolutely.
And then went to school at Utah State University. Because I worked on a farm with my grandparents, and that was the local university, and so I just went to USU and then anyway, taught at University of Missouri for about 15 years, and taught at BYU for about 9 years, and now I teach in the financial planning department, just one class. I'm kind of semi-retired, just one class in the investment portfolio design course is what I teach. But during that time frame, I've been writing on a monthly basis for Financial Planning magazine for about 20 years.
Yeah.
So that's, and then some other types of writing as well. But the thing I've learned in all of that is that I think it was Michelangelo who said, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication.
Oh man, I love it. Yeah.
And so what are the key things we're up to? And in the context of our conversation today, investment portfolio design, what are we really trying to achieve? And I'll throw out kind of a little bone here, the idea that we are building a portfolio and accumulating money and preparing for retirement. Those are central tasks, and those are important tasks. But it's also really important to remember that all of that stuff, that money, that portfolio, that 401k balance, that's just a facilitator for what we really want to accomplish while we walk this earth. So the idea that we need resources to do what we want to do, that's true. But we first got to figure out what we want to do, what we need to do, and then let the money help us do that, as opposed to chasing a carrot out in front of us. And if that takes us down maybe not the right path we should have gone down, then the carrot has blinded us instead of leading us.
Do you think that's, man, Craig, do you think that's, I don't want to say deliberately, but in American society as we sit here today, it seems like the carrot does lead us accordingly. And I don't know if that's, again, deliberate. I don't even know if it's nefarious, but it seems like everyone is chasing that carrot before they take care of their own selves in terms of their own mentality, their own ability to enjoy the fruits of eating that carrot, if that makes sense. I mean, how did we get here? I know we're putting the cart before the horse here, but I find that to be frightening, not the right word, but sad in some regard.
Well, I mean, money is a magnifier. Money magnifies our virtues. Money magnifies our vices. There are plenty of horror stories of people that inherit a lot of money, and then some commit suicide. Others turn really antisocial because they start hearing from friends they haven't heard of for years, and they just get bombarded. So the idea that money makes us who we are is really a bogus notion. We are what we seek to be and what we work to be, and money magnifies that. And that should be as scary as heck to realize that money is a magnifier. So that's why we really got to figure out what our life objectives are, and those can sort of ebb and flow. I mean, opportunities come up that we hadn't anticipated, and we look in the mirror, or look at our spouse, and say, "Should we do it? Should we take this path?" And then down you go. But the point is that what I wish I had understood earlier in my life as a teacher, so I could have been more clear in my teaching, is that the stewardship, we're really, when we talk about money, we're really talking about stewardship, because it doesn't go with us. Whatever a person's beliefs are, the idea that our 401k balance goes with us, into the next life, well, that ain't so, Joe. And so but there are attributes that go with us, our virtues, our capacities, and so forth. They go. I mean, those are portable. So how do we get those? How do we get those attributes, those virtues? Well, financial stewardship is a pretty good educator. It's a pretty good tutor in becoming a better steward over resources. And so money, the acquisition of money is certainly important to facilitate our life objectives, but even more important than the money is the acquisition of talents and virtues. And a lot of those are required by how well we stewardship and how wisely we steward the resources that we're given. And that, to me, is the big issue. It doesn't mean that we just throw money to the wind and say, well, I don't want to focus on this.
Right.
I'll just stare at lilies all day. No, it's not so much that. It's just that always keeping in mind that the resources we have are tools and not the end goal. And I know that's not a newsflash to anyone, but in a microwave sort of world, what we're talking about now is our crockpot ideas.
Yeah.
So we have this natural collision in a very, very fast-paced moving world where we're talking about crockpot ideas. We're talking about, planting oak trees in sort of a bamboo mindset world, or we're talking about a crockpot type of approach to life in a microwave mentality world. That's the natural collision. And we do have to talk to each other and remind ourselves, hey, let's get back in the crockpot and kind of mellow out, take a few more walks, this kind of thing. We do have to remind ourselves of that, because particularly the Western cultures are not so good at that. I'll just pick on the U.S. because here we are, but we're a pretty hard driving society. We put ourselves at our own risk by the pace of our lives.
Man, that's there's I use this example a lot, but I find this a lot from folks that on my YouTube channel and just folks who hire me for their financial planning. But I had a guy, talk about stewardship. He wants to make sure he's squared away with retirement. But he's sitting in traffic an hour and a half each way, Craig, and he's getting heavy because he's eating like crap. He's not getting any exercise. He's miserable at his job, and he's got well more than adequate 401k money to just leave. And I'll never forget talking to him. I said, there's nothing wrong with quitting that, again, crappy old job and starting to draw it down now. And if his whole thing is, what about healthcare? I said, because he had chops and a skill set that he could get a local job at a local firm, maybe not making the same kind of money he's making in the downtown firm. But the money wasn't the issue. It was the healthcare. I said, look, you can go work for $15 an hour, get full benefits, and wait till you're, he's again 61 or 62, I forgot, and do that for a couple of years, have less of a commute, get logged into their healthcare, and then 3 years from now go on Medicare. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. If anything, it'll probably it'll slow you down enough where you can actually smell those lilies and probably get in a little bit better health, because if you don't, you're going to have a heart attack and you're not going to That's not good. That's not good stewardship. Obviously, as financial resources, maybe, but not of his own mind, and it's certainly his body. And that happens a lot. It just is. I just wish people would stop and just just look around. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of fear when it comes to retirement planning and
Yes.
and really focusing on or assuming there's a magic number or
Yeah,
a minimum threshold, whether it's $1 million or $1.5 million or $2.5 million. That's a really hard number to calculate. The more important question, well, that's an important issue, and I write a lot about that. But what I have found in my work in the last, say, 5 years, as you look at a portfolio of, say, $500,000, and you take out 4% of it each year, 4% of the balance, so that portfolio is invested, broadly diversified portfolio. You take out 4%, it's really hard to kill that portfolio, right? Because a broadly diversified portfolio, remember, this is kind of in that, keep it simple, stupid approach, which is kind of the world where I live, because I'm not the brightest arrow in the quiver, the sharpest. That was a mixed metaphor. The sharpest.
Proving that, right?
Yeah. Proof the point right there. So the idea that you can pull out 4% isn't really hard to comprehend when you realize that a diversified portfolio will generate typically between 7 and 9% average return. Obviously, there's a wide fluctuation there, but that's what it produces over time, is between 7 and 9%, like rolling 10-year averages. Right. And so if you're making, say, 7%, you're taking out 4%, it doesn't take a PhD to figure out that works. Yeah. So the point being that if people can get away from the fear that they're going to run out of money, and because that's really a paralyzing fear.
Yes.
And look at the portfolio as, okay, so here's a bucket of money. The reality is that bucket of money will likely grow during your retirement, not deplete. If you take out 4% a year and you have a diversified portfolio, it's very difficult. And I've studied this back to 1926 over multiple rolling 25, 35, 45-year periods. It is very difficult to get that barrel of money to actually deplete during retirement. And so after studying this for 20 years, it finally dawns on me, wow, we need to stop living in fear.
Yes.
And figure out what to do with, and maybe this portfolio produces a modest retirement income. Great. Then let's figure out what we would like to do with a modest retirement income. I mean, that's really the sentence. Let's figure out what to do with this money that this portfolio is throwing off to us, as opposed to focusing on setting an absolute amount of money that we have to have, and then pulling that out of the portfolio, and maybe it's a 9% withdrawal rate to get this predetermined amount of retirement income. Well, at 9%, you can kill the portfolio.
Right.
So it's really vital that all of us have a grounded perspective in what is a reasonably safe withdrawal rate from a retirement portfolio. And it's in that 4%, 5% range. But that requires that we need to be lifelong investors in a diversified approach, with a diversified approach to the portfolio. If you're just sticking the whole thing in cash, then no. I mean, that's not likely going to work. But if you stick the whole thing in bonds, that may not work. So the key is that the moment that a person retires, they don't suddenly go from a broadly diversified investor in equities, real estate. I mean, just all the different asset classes of a diversified portfolio. You don't suddenly go from that to boom, everything in bonds and cash.
Right.
That notion needs to self-destruct and focus on investing from a lifetime perspective. And then once we get a level of comfort with what we're doing in terms of how much we have accumulated, how much we can withdraw, then our mind can stop being paralyzed by fear that we're going to run out of money, and we begin to do the more important thing, which is what you've been alluding to, which is what would we like to do now in chapter 3? You know, this is chapter 3 or chapter 4 of our life. What would be the best use of our energy, the best use of our accumulated talents? How can I bless my brothers and sisters? I mean, to put it very directly, what can I do to be of service? And the money is no longer the focus.
And I love how you framed it. What can we do with this modest level of income? And modest is subjective. We don't know what modest is, but given back
it's different.
So $20,000 that may be modest to you, completely subjective on you. But either way, let's just say I got $30,000 from Social Security, $20,000 from my modest portfolio. Again, just using that as an adjective here. All right, so that's $50,000 a year. What can I do with $50,000 a year? And my sneaky suspicion, Craig, is that many people don't know because they haven't thought that part of it. They've only thought, I need this, nut of $1 million or whatever it is, because everyone keeps saying it. And if you look at back how you just framed it, all right, regardless of what the media is saying, all that, forget that noise. You have this. Let's work in reality here. You have this. What can we get from that 4% without killing the portfolio, 5%, whatever it is, $25,000 a year, and how can we use that to live? And if that means, again, we have to get a part-time job, over at Home Depot or something, but that's something that you can, like you said, bless the fellow people who are working there with your presence and being a force for good in society. Is that a bad thing? And the issue is no. But the concern I have is very few people understand their expenses. Actually, they always look at it from an income, and they don't know what they actually need. And that's the thing I wish people would focus on more. And I know it's hard to say, look, I'm going to need this in retirement, because no one really knows. I get that until they do it. But just taking the time to think about what they actually need as opposed to what they think they should have. I wish more people would do that. I'm just curious. You find in your experience, your teaching, obviously, you're all over the place traveling stuff. Do you find the experience that people are not looking at it like that? Like, what can I get from my portfolio? And instead, like, oh man, I need more, so I'm gonna keep digging away, even if it's not making me happy. What's your experience as working with people?
That's a great question. A lot of who I speak to would be financial advisors, and so their concerns are the concerns of their clients. Yeah. And I guess the way that I would sort of approach not even an answer, but an attempt at an answer to your question would be, it would be interesting to ask people, based on the amount of money that they thought they needed, once they're 10 years into their retirement.
Oh man, yeah.
Do they have enough? And should they have worried as much as they did? Because that's really, there's two groups I talk with, a lot of financial advisor conferences or meetings, and then I speak to groups of investors, and those investor groups, the average age tends to be around 70 years of age. And these are people that I don't know how much money they have. The vast majority of them are retired, and they could have pensions. They may have pensions, right, because that's kind of there from yesteryear, back when pensions were more common, and they have, I don't know how many of them work, but what I think I see what I think I hear is that they still have an interest in investing because it's become a lifelong habit for them, and they are interested in sort of honing their skills. But it's not really honing their skills so they can eke out a little bit more money, so they can be a little bit happier. It has nothing to do with that, because there's not a straight line connection between you get one more dollar, you'll be this much more happy. There's a fairly stable positive correlation between money and stated happiness up to a certain point, and beyond that point, the relationship gets really fuzzy. We just don't need, if one Big Mac would make you happy, then certainly 30 Big Macs must make you 30 times happier. Well, obviously 30 Big Macs is not going to make a person happy. So what I think I observe is that people are happiest when they're engaged in worthy causes, and their retirement income is the facilitator of that energy that they're expending with this volunteer group, that volunteer group, their church group, their families, their grandkids. Money simply facilitates that, but money is not. I mean, they'll come to a conference that I speak at because they're interested to get some new ideas.
Right.
But it's not. And I have to emphasize this point. It's not because they're desperate to get 100 more basis points of return in their portfolio.
Right.
It's that partly it's just for entertainment. Not that I'm very entertaining, but it's really I'm not doing a very good job answering this, because people that come to that kind of conference, they self-select, and they probably have adequate means and they're doing fine. And a person who is really, really struggling may not have the emotional bandwidth to come to a meeting like that, because it's so depressing, to hear about what they don't have. So I don't mean to rule out the possibility that there are people that are really struggling in retirement. I'm certain that's true. But I would say no matter what, I guess I would almost be willing to go, unequivocally, no matter what a person's financial status, they still need, the higher need is meaning in their life.
Yeah.
That's the highest need, is meaning. And meaning can be acquired and be found and be generated without spending a lot of money. So I'm a Viktor Frankl guy. I love Viktor Frankl. Man's Search for Meaning.
Absolutely.
And so it really comes down to having the honesty within ourselves to say, okay, what does our income, whether during our working career, during our retirement, what does it allow us to do? Then we must do that. And we can be happy with that. We can be. And people have different.
I love what you said about engagement. Man, that's because engagement is synonymous with meaning, in my opinion. If you have we talk about grandkids before we start recording and whatnot, but if you have whatever, grandkids, your engagement in, gardening, but just having something more than just like a hobby. I mean, the hobbies are great, don't get me wrong, but, engagement that gives you the meaning. And that's just not for retirees too. It's, we also talk about, folks burning the midnight oil at the job and whatnot before we start recording. It's one thing to do that in full throttle with nothing else but work focus, but that's not really a true engagement, other than that's your life. If you have other ways to be engaged, it's actually pretty interesting, Craig. The profundity, whatever, of that actually it just makes you think on that. Like the engagement is what brings the happiness, and the tool of the ability to engage is the money. But the money doesn't create the engagement. You create the engagement, and the money can allow it to happen. If that makes sense.
That's right. There's plenty of exampes of people that have been phenomenally engaged and have had virtually no money. I mean, Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa is a pretty classic example of that. And
absolutely.
And so that is where everyone has to have a sit down with themselves every so often.
Yeah.
And determine. Well, I just remember one of my major professors during my doctoral work. His wife said to me one time, "Craig, if I could go back and change one thing, it would be that I would, as we were talking with our children about money, I would have emphasized what our money allows us to do more often, and would not have spoken quite as often about what our level of income did not allow us to do." She said, I would have spoken more positively about what our money allows us to do, whatever the amount is.
Right.
And that may sound so straightforward just to say it like that, but to me it was just very powerful to always, I mean, if we live in a spirit of gratitude, I just think about Schindler, that classic line, the Schindler, near the end of the movie when he says, I could have sold my car to save more Jews.
Oh.
And I just think, yes, that, because he found his purpose. He found his purpose to be a savior, of people, and that he had a car that could have saved more people. What a horrible trade! I mean, and this guy, he's amazing. But that sort of spirit of what are we accumulating this stuff for? If it's not to facilitate our life objectives and the task, and some tasks are handed to us. They are handed to us, and we have to measure up to that task. And some of the tasks, a lot of important life tasks, have precious little to do with money. And so I guess to come back to the idea that money is a magnifier, we just have to be mindful of what we are letting it magnify. Is it magnifying our selfishness? Ooh, that's bad. Is it magnifying? Yeah. Is it magnifying our graciousness, our kindness? Oh, well, that's wonderful. And as it magnifies those virtues rather than vices, that magnification usually begins to create opportunities for us, because people are drawn to that. People are drawn to kindness. People are drawn to virtue. And it creates opportunities. Some people might think, oh, it's because you had money. That's why you got the opportunity.
Right.
It's possible. The other possibility is that you were letting money magnify your virtues, and that's what opened up the opportunity, was that kindness that you demonstrate, and that those virtues of humility and so forth that you demonstrate.
It's kind of like, people are drawn to people who are happy. You know what I mean? Like smiles. When you smile, more people are drawn to you because you're doing something right, it looks like.
Shocker, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. Hey, that guy's happy, that guy's mad. I would rather be happy. I guess there's a lady, and I interviewed her a while back. She had written this book called Brilliant, Jane Brock's out of Maine, as a matter of fact. And it just talked about history of electricity, like on the farms and what. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. And she had just published a book called Silence. And I haven't read it yet, and I'm going to read it, and I've got it. But the issue is we have so much noise around us, Craig, that I just don't think, and myself included, that we just don't put the phone down for long enough to allow. We're both Christian. We already said that, but for me, I think it's the Holy Spirit. And I imagine you do too. But whatever people believe, but there's something that is in there but it needs a silence to talk to you. And I think if you just can think about like what you're talking about, what is your engagement? What is your reason to be? What if you could sell the extra car, maybe not to save Jews from the Nazis, but maybe to, I don't know. I don't know what it'd be, but you got to know. And the only way to know is to take the time to turn everything off and think about it. And that's my one big concern I have about where we are today in society is there's so much noise that, and I think personally as a guy who reads C.S. Lewis, I know it's the devil talking. The devil loves the noise. And in the Screwtape Letters, he talks about how loud hell is that you can't think. You just don't have a chance to think. And I just worry about, I'm worried, it's not the right word. It does bother me, though, because I get sucked into it, too. Just the level of noise out there. How do you, would you have any recommendations on what people can do maybe to, whatever it is, and you don't have to. I'm just curious, like, how do people get to know what their mission is in life? If that makes sense. Like, what did Mother Teresa? She found it someplace. How did Craig Israelsen find it? Any recommendations on how people can find that call?
Well, a couple of ideas. Some are very pragmatic, and some are probably a bit more ethereal. But my brother, he travels quite a bit, and he always has a $20 bill in his pocket, and as he's going through the airports, he tries to be sensitive to his feelings as to who might need this, who's in distress. And this is dicey stuff, right? Because we don't want to offend people. But that's his, and so he's looking.
Right.
He's outside of his own distress. And when we travel is kind of a sequence of distressors.
Yes.
and so he's trying to get out from his own little world. That's one example that I've been impressed with. Talking to other people and asking more questions, asking more, listening more, speaking less, just asking people what they find meaningful. When I travel, and my wife and I travel a fair amount, I'll always ask people where do they enjoy going on vacation, because it takes the conversation in a different direction. In other words, I'm trying to get them to tell me what they enjoy doing, or I'll ask them about their children. And the idea is, if we say these are the traveling or time with our children, if these are the most important things, the question is really, in a sense, meant to ask. I'm probing. Without saying it, are you doing enough of that? And I'm not trying to be judgmental.
Right.
It's not a judgmental question. It's a gentle prod of, are you taking some time off? Are you enjoying the opportunities that are, if you like to travel, these are your vacation spots. When did you last go? Right. And it sounds like I'm trying to muscle people, to feel guilty. It's not a shaming technique. I'm just interested in what people like to do in their spare time, and I think just reading really good literature. You mentioned C.S. Lewis. I very much enjoy reading Lewis, and I'm just reminded of in The Great Divorce, his book, The Great Divorce, where people are day tripping up to heaven, and then they have this little episode in heaven, and then they get back on the bus and they leave, and the angels are beckoning them, please stay with us. We want you to stay. And they don't stay because they're off on their next little folly, next little adventure. And so the idea that if whatever a person's sort of nirvana state might be, the idea that that's off in the distance, I think, is not a helpful notion. I mean, heaven or eternity is not down the road. We live in eternity now. I mean, the present is part of eternity. And so, again, no matter what a person's faith orientation is, the idea that we're only laboring for something in the future is only so helpful. Yeah. The reality for me is that if eternity is now, if I am immersed in the bosom of eternity, okay, then am I supporting that? Am I supporting that sort of eternal destination today? And am I making use of my opportunities today and not pushing everything out in the future? I mean, for children, that's very difficult. For teenagers, that's very difficult. You don't talk about, let's focus on something we're going to do 30 years from now. To a 12-year-old, like a 12-year-old male can't even think past, tomorrow. And so the opportunities in front of us are part today, this very day. Well, let me get very personal. I had a student come to me when I was teaching, and she was very depressed, suffering with manic depression. And I asked her some very direct questions, and I'm going to be kind of religious here. I said, "Do you believe in Jesus? Do you believe in Jesus Christ?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Do you believe that Jesus Christ can save you?" She said, "Yes." And then I said, "Do you believe that he can save you today?" And that was a very profound moment for both of us. That was not a line of questions that I had contemplated going down that road.
Really? Oh, man.
But the reality of that moment was that she needed help right now.
Today, exactly.
Not at the pearly gates,
right?
Metaphorically speaking. She needed help right now. And that has been that's a conversation that took place probably 12 years ago. And I think about that quite often, because the reality is that what we're trying to do in terms of retirement planning and investment planning is we're trying to focus on tomorrow. We're trying to prepare for the morrow, but we also have the needs of the moment, and we're trying to balance those.
Yeah.
And that balance may not always be arithmetically equal. More likely, it's like people say, well, I'm going to, as a young parent, I'm going to balance my time between my kids and my work. It's going to be 50-50.
Right.
Good luck, dude. That is really hard to do. And so that's this accounting notion of balance is very, very challenging in our world. You're not working with your kids on the farm. It's not like that anymore for most of us. So we need a different definition of balance. And that different definition of balance, probably the easiest way to think about that is an orchestra. And an orchestra has a balanced sound, even though there are way more violins than tubas. And so the strings outnumber pretty much everybody else. You got a lot of brass, you got a lot of strings, you got timpani and so forth, but there's not an equal number of people playing each instrument, not even close. You have maybe 2 oboes, that's it. And you have like 30 or 40 violins.
Right.
But this is harmonic. This is harmonic balance. And if so that's another suggestion per your question, how do we find kind of our meaning? Well, our meaning, the way we can generate meaning is to not always approach things as if we are an accountant, but maybe approach things more like we are a conductor of an orchestra, and things out in front of us are not all equal.
Oh, man.
But we can still achieve this harmonic balance in our life, even though all the buckets aren't exactly equal.
Yeah, man, that's I love how too you said eternity is too. I never thought that's actually incredibly profound to me. Eternity, you are in it. Literally, eternity is literally today. I mean, it
has to be.
If
if eternity has no beginning, if it has no beginning and no end, well then today can't be outside of it.
I never, man. That is. Craig, I never. And I'm not. I never thought about it like that. Eternity is today. It's right now. So you are in it now. So what are you doing today for your eternity? And if you're just kind of going back to what you said, that lady, Let me ask you a question. I don't want to, but all right. So you got a number of kids. I do too. One of the things I do have a question on. This is a little bit off, but how? I always wonder because I know people who get depression, bipolar. I've known people who've overdosed on heroin and died, and you're saying why would they do that? And just how did you get your every child is different, every person is different, but anything from a dad, grandparent perspective to say, hey, these are some of the things in terms of that you, and just as a teacher as well, that you say, hey, this is, some of this stuff happens that, I don't know, you might want to be aware of it. Because I always worry about my kids with depression. I don't have any evidence that they have any of that, but just, I talk to a lot of people, and you hear just regular middle class people, and one of their daughters went off and is now dead because of heroin addiction, and they just they just couldn't take the depression they had. And I don't know what I'm even trying to ask you, but any thoughts on that by chance?
Yeah, I do have a lot of thoughts on that. I've taught over 15,000 students in my career, and then I've had all I'm saying is I've had a lot of conversations with students, and many of those conversations have to do with struggles with anxiety, struggles with eating disorders. I mean, when my students realize, if I make mention in conversation that we have 7 children and so forth, bingo, they're away from home. Maybe I can talk to this guy. I mean, I become sort of this kind of like, he's not my dad, but maybe he understands, and so they'll take a chance. And so I've had a lot of really beautiful conversations with my students over the years, and they know that I love them. And I'll get up in their grill. You can count on that. But I can because they know where my heart is. And I am convinced that there are probably some people for whom there is an organic connection to depression. It may be daylight deficiency. They need more sunlight. It could be there's. But I think in a lot of cases, it's a disconnect from the world. In other words, how many people have put their hand in the soil? How many people have watched a plant grow? My wife and I are reading a book right now called Lost Connections, and it's on this exact topic. Is it all just brain chemistry? Well, the author of this book is suggesting no, it's not. It may have a lot less to do with serotonin and a lot more to do with lost connections with the earth, lost connections with groups of people, lost connections with service opportunities, and so the way out of that is to create more connections. And it's just kind of a different way of talking about what we were talking about a few minutes ago, engagement.
Yeah, exactly. Right, say engagement. No, I was thinking that exact, it all comes back to meaning. I mean, literally meaning. And
in saying that, and some people will suffer. I mean, some people suffer with diabetes, and it's not something they're going to get over. Other people may suffer with sort of cyclical mood or a cyclical sort of semi-depression, okay? But, and that may be for many years. That may be a burden they carry, but that burden will create a level of empathy that can be acquired no other way. In other words, this is a beautiful, this is what Viktor Frankl taught, that suffering ceases to be suffering at the precise moment it finds a meaning, such as the meaning of a sacrifice. So meaningless suffering is really, really hard. Meaningful suffering has a purpose. And so I think one of the first pathways that we all have to come to, because we all have suffered something in life, and depression is a very distinct sort of ongoing cloud following you around all the time. Is this suffering meaningless or meaningful? And now our task becomes to find ways to help it be meaningful. And it may be that in our own suffering, we gain compassion and empathy that simply we could not have acquired any other way. I mean, for a Christian, the
Yes.
idea that Christ suffered for us, his suffering had meaning. It wasn't meaningless suffering. If it was meaningless suffering, that's a pretty horrible story. So the value of our trials is that we become a resource to others. And that is it's a painful path. Well, but so is being a really good athlete, so is being a really good ballet dancer, so is being a really good cellist. I mean, there is pain. To be good at anything, it's a painful path and an arduous path, but it does have outcomes that are helpful to others. And so I really, really believe that mental illness is a reality, that depression is real,
Mm-hmm.
its consequences are real, and I also really believe that viewing chemicals as the primary solution is not likely going to lead. If that was going to lead to good outcomes, we would have seen more good outcomes by now at a societal level, and we're not.
The proof of being the pudding. I mean, literally, if you can, dope yourself up and you're happy all the time, then we'd have the evidence of that could not be disputed, and that's simply not the case. It's we have 20 years now of evidence that says, if anything, is the opposite direction for sure. What is the name of that book you said?
Lost Connections.
Lost Connections. Gotcha. And the author, off the top of your head, do you remember?
The author is Johann Hari, H-A-R-I, Hari, H-A-R-I.
Okay. I'll put a link, folks, in the show notes for that. And Craig, was that the same book you were talking about before we started recording? It was.
Yeah, the other book is called Factfullness. Factfullness by Hans Rosling, R-O-S-L-I-N-G, Hans Rosling, Factfullness. Just finished that book, and it is stunningly helpful.
I want to. I know I want to remember that, so I want to have it on the record so I can relocate it and then put it in the Amazon in my cart. That's Nassim Taleb. Nicholas Taleb calls it the anti-library. My library just keeps growing bigger and bigger and bigger by the day, and that's, I guess, a sign of intellectualism. If your library keeps growing, because every time you read a book, you add 4 more to the to-do list. So I'm looking at it now with all these books I want to read. But no, those are 2 fantastic books. Now, before I let you go, because I told you we had a hard stop, but now you have a couple books, and just real quick, briefly on your 712 portfolio and how people can get access to it and what you're doing with that. If you don't mind just taking like 5 minutes or something, and how people can connect with you and all that, Craig. I think it's I'll put this like I said, I'll do an introduction talking all about it, but if you don't mind just sharing your little bit of a pitch for it as well, because I think it's fantastic.
Sure. Well, I was teaching at BYU, and I had a student come up after class, and he said, "Hey, Dr. I, so we've been talking about investing, we're talking about portfolios and mutual funds and all that. So what would be in a diversified portfolio?" And I thought, well, that's a good question. I mean, that's because there's so many tickers out there. There's so many mutual funds. There's so many asset classes. There's so many ETFs. How do you boil it down to a really concise answer? Now, his question was perfect. And so I was on a flight somewhere because I didn't have a really concise answer for him. And this is having written, hundreds of articles in Financial Planning magazine. But now you ask a relevant, a great relevant question, and you expect an answer? What are you thinking? And so,
how dare you?
So I was on a flight, and I began listing, okay, so what asset classes would be, in my opinion, really important to have in a diversified portfolio? Because sort of the classic approach is, stocks and bonds, Fidelity balanced, Vanguard balanced, T. Rowe Price balanced, all these, and that's the reserved name. A balanced fund is usually 60% stock, 40% bonds. It's a meat and potatoes approach. It's That approach is almost 90 years old, and we have so many more asset classes today that are now investable. So I began to list out some asset classes that I thought belonged in a, quote, diversified portfolio, and I finally settled on 12. And those 12 asset classes, you can think of them as boxes. And those boxes can be arranged in 7 distinct silos, 7 distinct broad asset classes. And those 7 are large, are U.S. stock. Then the next silo is non-U.S. stock.
Mm-hmm.
Then the next silo is real estate, and then natural resources, and then U.S. fixed income, non-U.S. fixed income, and cash. So those are the 7 silos. And in those 7 silos are 12 distinct boxes. For example, in the U.S. stock silo, there's 3 boxes: large U.S. stock, mid-cap U.S. stock, small-cap U.S. stock. And each of those boxes has an 8.33% allocation, meaning everything's equally weighted.
Yeah.
So that's where the name 712 comes from, is 7 silos, 12 actual tickers or positions. And all of that was really, I mean, you think about I've been asked thousands of questions, and this particular question really got me going. And that became what is now known as the 712 portfolio, the 712 model, the number 7, followed by the word spelled out 12. Mm-hmm. And it's a design that is an expansion of this sort of classic balanced, just stock bond model. Now we have 8 tickers that are allocated to what I call engines, the portfolio engines, and 4 tickers that are allocated to the portfolio brakes. Bonds are kind of like brakes, stocks and real estate and commodities are kind of like engines. And so it basically takes the idea of diversification and magnifies it. And the easiest way for people really to think about it that aren't familiar with investing is just, you're just making some salsa. You're adding different ingredients together, and this salsa has to be evaluated collectively. In other words, a person doesn't make salsa by putting all the separate ingredients in separate bowls and then tell their guests at the party, listen, get a big chip and dip it into each separate bowl and then chew really fast, and it'll become salsa in your mouth. And so the idea is that, sometimes people will look at a portfolio and they'll kind of microanalyze the individual components. Well, we don't really do that with salsa necessarily. We make the salsa, and if the overall result is pleasing to us, we declare it, hey, this is great salsa. We don't microanalyze the cilantro. And so a portfolio is best looked at in the same way. Don't microanalyze all the components. Look at the end result of all the components together interacting together. And what it does is it reminds us not to get too tied up in the weeds, because that's where we begin to sort of slip back into a microwave way of thinking, that everything has to happen fast. Investing, and particularly an approach like 712, is very much a crock pot type of approach to investing. And build it. I mean, really, you can summarize the whole thing. Build a diversified portfolio, and 712 is an example of, and there's many good diversified portfolios out there. 712 is an example of one. Try to save at least 8 to 12 to 15% of your income each year. Try to invest that. Do that for about 40 years, and if you do that consistently, you'll have plenty of money. But more importantly, you'll be a different person. Because if anything you do consistently, consistency is its own rewarder. Consistency, the only way we become consistent and disciplined is to be consistent and be disciplined. And so we acquire what we seek by doing that. And the reality is that if you have a person who is a consistent lifetime investor versus a person who inherits a bunch of money, and so by the age of 70,
yes. Yeah, exactly.
by the age of 70, they have the same amount of money? True. Are they the same type of people? Probably not.
Exactly.
And so I kind of we're circling back on what we've been talking about, which is, yeah, you'll have the money you need, but you'll be the person that you really need to be.
That's why those people win the lottery, go bankrupt, you know what I'm saying? Because they haven't built the consistency, they haven't done the due diligence to figure out how to get there. They just even people who inherit lots of money. Exactly.
They haven't become that person. There's no shortcut to becoming that person. If it takes 30 years to be a great cellist, well, then it probably takes 30 years to acquire a lot of the virtues that we seek. And maybe it takes 60 years. Maybe it takes 6,000 years. I mean, the idea is that we are, let me put it this way. This is an odd segue, but, a person who's trying to recover from alcoholism, they're trying to recover from an addiction. So are they going to be are they going to achieve recovery after 12 weeks? Or is recovery a new way of life?
Man.
It's the latter. Recovery is a new way of life. It's not a 12-week program. It's not. I mean, if we think in terms of programs, if I do this for 3 months, I'll be fluent in Spanish.
Right.
I mean, we are creating a package. And we are creating a package of talents, capacities, awarenesses, sensitivities. We are creating this package that has an eternal destiny. And how do we create that package? By doing our chores. And as we do our chores, we become that person that we thought we never could be. Like, I know some great people, and they're just so patient and so kind.
Right.
Well, how do you think they got there, brother?
Exactly.
And so if we'll just do our chores and find joy in our chores, and I'm making it sound like, I have rose-colored glasses on. I seriously don't have rose-colored glasses on, but I'm old enough to now realize if I can find joy in the everyday chores, the everyday opportunities, then I have found a diamond. I mean, to find meaning in what some people think of as mundane. I mean, there's a lot of mundane stuff we have to repeat. If we can find joy and meaning in the mundane, bingo! we win.
And then the funny thing is, once you find that, everything else is just, you know what I'm saying? It's like, I don't care what some guy said on Facebook. I don't care about whatever. I mean, you just don't care. That's the for me, that's the elixir. Is that the right word? Is just say, I'm just gonna, I'm okay with it. It's whatever. I don't care, and just move on. And once you get to that, and I'm not there. I mean, no one's, I don't think, ever there. But I'm always working towards that way, because if you're not working towards that way, you're falling back. And at some point, you got to make the decision: do I want to go to the right or to the left? Not politically, but do I want to go over there? Well, I got to take the first step, which means I got to do the dishes. Hey. Maybe find out that's not a bad place to be, because at least I have the capacity to do that. I'm not saying, like you said, rose-colored glass, but you do that stuff on a regular basis, and next thing you know, 10 years has gone by, and you're like, hey, I'm pretty good at patience or whatever. I mean.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
The reality, when I have students come in and say, I ask them how they're doing, they say, I'm just, same old. And I look at them and I say, really, you're 20 years old and you're giving me the same old routine? You're not old enough to be saying that. Okay, you stop saying that crap. There is so much.
A long way ahead, buddy.
There's so much in front of us, and when we can consider. There's one author I really like, and I'm sure this is not a new expression to people that are hearing this, but this attitude of gratitude. Yeah, and if there's anything that we can cultivate, and we can cultivate cultivate this, a sense, a feeling, a perspective of gratitude that we are grateful for what we have.